So, our first subject of the night is going to be the stupid fucking debt ceiling. What's going on with this? Well, I'm sure if you are if you're like me and you are a news junkie, or even if you just slightly pay attention to what's going on in the world with the news, I'm sure you've probably heard that the Republicans and Biden have come to an agreement and they're going to raise the stupid fucking debt ceiling. Which is great, joy, joy, all that stuff. I mean, it's not like they weren't going to do it anyway. We kind of knew that, yes, it was going to get raised. But with Republicans nowadays, you never know. They're kind of crazy. And especially when we have people like Lauren Boebert and MTG in there who don't know their asshole from a hole in the ground and have no clue what the hell they're doing and are only there to like personally enrich themselves. They might not understand exactly what would happen if we were to default on the debt ceiling. And basically, we have a bunch of crazies running the place, so we can't really trust them. So that's why it gets a little sweaty. People start getting a little worried. But anyway, what the hell is the debt ceiling all about? Why do we even have this fight? Basically, long story short, starting back in the 40s and 50s, right? There, each department in the government used to have its own sort of account, right? So you would have the defense budget, and then you would have the domestic spending budget, highway system or something like that. And then law enforcement, FBI, stuff like that, the CIA, they would get their own budget, that kind of thing. And then all of these things were passed individually, right? And right around, I'm not exactly sure what year it started, but they consolidated all of this into a national budget that Congress would vote on in a bid to sort of simplify the process. So that way they're not constantly voting on budgets for this and budgets for that and all of that other stuff. They could just do it once per year and be done with it and spend the rest of the time like doing other stuff like, campaigning and raising money for their corporate donors, that kind of thing. So somehow somebody thought it would be a great idea to make it so that they had to vote every time that there would be a ceiling as to how much money the government was allowed to spend. And they would have to vote in order to increase that ceiling. And in administrations past, in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, it was never a big deal. They would just raise it whenever they hit the debt ceiling, because if they didn't raise it, it would cause all kinds of economic problems, like severe economic problems. We'll come to those in a little bit, right? So for all of the other presidents, all throughout those decades, it got raised without any problem at all. Under Ronald Reagan, they raised it 18 times. They raised it 7 times under George W. Bush Jr., right? Good old W, right? But it really only seems to be when a Democrat gets into office, then suddenly there becomes this giant problem about raising the actual debt ceiling. So, for example, under Bill Clinton, they used it repeatedly as a weapon under Bill Clinton, and especially against Obama. So, like back in 1995, there was a big government shutdown, and I remember this, right? I was just very new to politics at the time, just becoming politically active myself, and this was a big deal. This was like the first time the government had been shut down, like ever. And things like paychecks weren't going out, and old people weren't getting their social security checks, and all this stuff was happening, and it was like a major problem because the Republicans under Newt Gingrich at that time decided to play footsie with the debt ceiling, right? And basically used it in order to extract concessions. And the same thing happened under Obama, right, as well. In fact, it happened twice under Obama. First time in 2011 with the debt ceiling crisis. This resulted in 2011 resulted in the stock market tanking, losing somewhere in the area of 200 points. And then also, this resulted in a credit downgrade for the United States, which up until that point had AAA rating. Right now, what does a AAA rating means? It means that the government bonds are essentially guaranteed, and government bonds are usually seen as a very, very safe investment. And so you have not only financial institutions all around the world investing in government bonds, but also of other countries, basically places like China. They're the ones buying up all our debt. Where do you think we get all this money from every year, right? When it comes to the United States debt, they say it's like what $30 trillion now. Like, who do you think's buying up all that debt? Well, it's places like China and other countries out there. That the reason why is because traditionally in the United States, we honor that debt, right? And government bonds pay off after a number of years. I don't really know. I don't have it in front of me, but it takes usually a couple of decades or something like that. And you get it's a steady investment. You get X number of like whatever the interest rate was when you bought them or something like that, and you're pretty much guaranteed to get your money, right? Well, for the first time in 2011, the credit of the United States got downgraded because the Republicans were fucking playing ball with the debt ceiling. They were playing around with it, right? Holding the debt ceiling hostage in order to extract concessions. I think what it was in 2011 is that they wanted to make the Bush tax cuts permanent. George W. Bush becomes president and then immediately does a giant, huge tax cut. And they wanted to make that shit permanent because Republicans only give a fuck about taxes. That's the only thing they care about, is cutting spending and cutting taxes for rich people. And because of that, for the first time ever, the United States AAA rating got downgraded to like just a double plus rating or whatever, which, sounds like, oh, that's no big deal, right? And yeah, it's recovered. It's since recovered its AAA rating since then. But that resulted in something around $19 billion, $18.9 billion in increased borrowing costs over the following 10 years, somewhere around there. Just losing that AAA credit rating. That's let's just round that up to $20 billion. That's $20 billion of United States taxpayer money that was just spent on interest because we had a shittier interest rate, because we had a shittier credit rating because of Republicans. So, that's why when Republicans tell you that, oh, we're fiscally responsible, in real life, it's the exact opposite. They're not fucking fiscally responsible. They cost us $20 billion. That went to nothing. $20 billion that just went to interest because these assholes want to fucking play around with the debt ceiling, right? With Obama, it happened again in 2013. I remember this too. This was like a giant thing. They had like, what did they call it? Like the fiscal cliff in 2013. And then the sequester, we're not going to spend any more money. We're going to sequester that. It was such bullshit. And it was just the same fucking thing. Just Republicans like holding the economy of the entire world, really, not just the United States, holding the entire world economy hostage so that they can extract concessions from Obama. And this time, what they wanted they wanted him to defund Obamacare, the ACA. They wanted him to defund that, which was like his signature achievement for his presidency, right? So there was a huge fight over that again in 2013. And it's like, you notice, though, when Trump becomes president, right, 2016, there's no debt fight over this. There's no fight over the debt ceiling at all. Zero. Nada. Zilch. Right? Did the Democrats hold the economy hostage? And they easily could have, if they wanted to be dicks and to like give the Republicans a taste of their medicine. They easily could have said, hey, we are going to hold this, and we're not going to vote for the debt ceiling unless you give us X, Y, Z. They didn't do that. Why? Because the Democrats, right, actually, say what you want to say about them, they don't play around with the economy like that. Maybe they should. Maybe they should start doing the exact same thing to the Republicans when a Republican president is in charge. that they do to Democratic presidents, right? Because it's happened again. Now it's Joe Biden's turn. And basically, every time that there's a Democratic president, this exact same shit happens again and again and again, right? So, okay. I was wondering that wasn't like getting the pen pressure in there, but it looks like it actually is. So, anyway. So, yeah. This time, now here's the thing, right? This time it was a little more pathetic. And apparently, because, the Republicans kind of have their heads up their asses here, right? And the Speaker of their House is incredibly weak and barely able to get anybody to, fall in line, that they got very, very few concessions. Like, one of the things that the Republicans wanted to get out this time is they wanted to reverse, for example, the $80 billion that was allotted towards the IRS. That's a big pet peeve of theirs, because that means the IRS is going to have money and they'll start actually auditing rich people, right? Because here's the thing, right? For the last, decade or so, right, and then worsened under Trump, the IRS actually hasn't had the budget required in order to enforce the law, right? So it's very, very difficult to audit rich people. Somebody like Donald Trump, if they wanted to audit him, for example, right? It's very, very hard. It takes a lot of man hours, takes a lot of resources, right? So they kind of, for the last decade or so, have been ignoring that, and they've been going after small fry, normal, ordinary people like you or me who may forget to fill out a form or something. They've been auditing us, and they've been leaving the huge targets, the corporations and the oligarchs, they've been leaving them alone. Well, now that they actually are going to have a budget for the first time in like fucking a decade, they'll be able to actually go after some of these people, and the Republicans don't like that, so they wanted to get rid of it. But here's the thing, it's like they only seem to have, so what it was is from what I understand, out of the 80 billion that was promised to them, they're going to they only cut like 10 billion, so it's still like they're still getting like $70 billion over 10 years, right? So it's sort of like they kind of lost, they what the hell is the speaker's name? Speaker of the House. What's Kevin McCarthy, that guy? Like, Kevin McCarthy just kind of blew it and didn't really get what he wanted. Now, apparently there was one really bad thing that I heard, which is they have this concept of pay-go, which is whenever you, they've been doing this in Congress for years, apparently. And the idea is that whenever you propose something, then you have to make, and it costs money, then you have to put an appropriate cut somewhere else. And apparently one of his concessions that McCarthy managed to actually get is that he's going to apply that towards, he's managed to get a concession that pay-go will be applied towards presidential executive orders, right? Which, in some sense, could very well limit the kind of executive orders that Joe Biden wants to do. If he does an executive order that actually costs any money, then he's got to find some place to cut somewhere else in the budget. Here's a solution for you. Cut some military spending. There you go. And maybe that's what he intends to do. Maybe Joe Biden's just going to be like, yeah, we're going to cut this and this, and cancel this jet fighter that nobody wants, that we spent like $17 trillion on over the last decade, stuff like that. Maybe that's what Joe Biden will do in order to like actually get some of his agenda out. Well, I don't know. We'll find out. But somehow I doubt it, though. Somehow I severely doubt that Joe Biden's going to be doing shit like that. But who knows? It could backfire, is what I'm saying. So, yeah, that may or may not be a good thing. Time will tell on that. And I've also heard it said, like on the Young Turks, for example, where they said, well, Joe Biden gave that away because he doesn't want to actually make any systemic changes, which is a good point. And it always gives him the ability to point at that and say, see, I can't do anything because I got this pay-go restriction. So I don't know. We'll see what Joe Biden does about that. But either way, it's like, it could be good, could be bad. What I'm seeing online, though, is that it seems like most people are saying that Biden kind of came out on top on this one. which is, I guess, we'll see. Sounds, it's like, okay, maybe if we can chalk this up to a Biden win, I don't know. The other good thing that he apparently got was that there won't be another debt ceiling fight until at least 2025, until after the election. So for the rest of, if they have to raise it again for the rest of the next, his first term, then there won't be a fight, which is, that sounds kind of awesome, right? Now here's the thing, it's like, why do we even fucking have this in the first place, right? Why do we even fucking bother with it? One of the things that you hear on the progressive left a lot is that, well, we have the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment says basically that the debt will be paid. It shall be paid. It doesn't leave a lot of wiggle room for maybe it'll be paid or maybe we can negotiate it. It says that the debts incurred by the United States will be paid. End of story, right? The exact language. The validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law, including debts incurred for payment of pensions and bounties for service in suppressing insurrection or rebellion, shall not be questioned. Right? So it doesn't even say, it says shall not be questioned. Well, it kind of sounds like when they have these debt ceiling fights, that what they're doing is questioning the debt, is it not? I mean, that's what it kind of sounds like to me. It kind of sounds like, okay, here's some guys who don't want to pay for, And the thing to keep in mind is that this is money which has already been spent. It's not money that they're going to spend. It's not money that they want to spend. This money has already been spent. And if they don't authorize raising the debt there, then that money which has already been spent, it's basically when you don't pay your bills, right? You foreclose on your debt. Or not foreclose on your debt, but you basically renege on your debt. You refuse to pay your debt. Well, what happens if, say, for example, you refuse to pay your credit card or something like that? They cancel your card. If you refuse to pay your mortgage, they foreclose on your house. Same kind of thing happens, right? If they don't actually pay the debt, if they don't actually raise the debt ceiling, then it will basically result in utter fucking chaos in the United States and worldwide, essentially, right? So first thing that you can bet on, as soon as that debt doesn't get paid, the good credit, the faith and credit in the United States is gone. Our money in this country is backed by nothing. It's not backed by anything. We used to have the gold standard stuff like that, right? We don't have that anymore. Our money is backed by the good faith and credit of the United States, right? And that's easy when your country actually does have good credit, right? What happens when the United States doesn't have good credit anymore? Well, the value of that dollar plummets, right? Because who's going to want to do business with a currency that doesn't have its value anymore? That's kind of what happened during the Bush years too. During the Bush years, because of all this overspending and all that shit, the two wars at the same time, all that, the tax cut, economic downturn, dollar lost, something like a quarter of its value during the Bush years because of all of that shit, right? I mean, the last thing you want, and right now the dollar is the world reserve currency. Oil is traded in dollars, things like that. So when countries do business with each other, they're doing business in dollars, essentially. Long story short, it's a lot more complicated than that, but that's basically, what a reserve currency is. When a bank is paying another bank, they're paying each other in dollars, and then it gets converted to whatever currency your country has, right? Well, why would anybody want to use the dollar as a reserve currency when the country's good faith and credit is not that good and doesn't have that credit anymore? I mean, they may switch to something else. They may switch to the euro. They may switch to, the Chinese, what do they call it, the yuan over there, right? They may switch to something else, which if that happens, if the United States dollar is no longer the reserve currency, it's utter economic fucking chaos, right? The value of your dollar will crash. It can lead to all kinds of crazy shit. It can lead to things like hyperinflation. you think inflation is bad now, it would be incredibly bad. Like, I mean, imagine if no one's using dollars anymore and your dollar suddenly becomes super fucking worthless, right? Like, I mean, you think eggs, costing $6 a fucking dozen is like a bad thing? Like, wait till it costs $60 a dozen. Like, seriously, I'm not even joking. That's one of the, so far as a country, we've managed to avoid things like hyperinflation, right? Because we're the world's reserve currency. That's the reason why. If we don't have that anymore, it opens the door to all kinds of crazy shit that we've managed to like thankfully avoid with all of this reckless spending, right? So that's one thing. It would like if we default on the sovereign debt by not paying our bondholders, that's what could happen. It would skyrocketing interest rates. Like let's say that doesn't happen. Let's say we don't end up losing ourselves as a world currency. Like, what's the least scenario? Like the best case scenario is what I mean. What is the best case scenario if we default on our debts, right? Skyrocketing interest rates, like in the double digits. Like, interest rates of 15, 20, 25%. You think a house is expensive now when, you're paying 5 or 6%. Imagine trying to buy a house for $500,000 with a 15% interest rate. Good luck, right? I mean, you wouldn't even be able to buy a car at that much. Like, so that's one thing, right? Imagine businesses, millions of people work for businesses who take out regular loans in order to make payroll. Well, if interest rates are like super high like that, then they won't be able to take out those loans. And all of those businesses are not going to be able to pay their people, and then they're going to go out of business. Like, that's what actually happened in 2008. That was part of the reason why we have, like, for example, quantitative easing, right? Because a lot of businesses were going under because they couldn't afford to take out, because what'll happen is, like, say, a lot of businesses will take out micro loans like that, for a week, and then they make payroll, and then they get their accounts, and then they pay that loan back. And that's just sort of a thing that is just a standard business practice, right? In the United States. Well, imagine suddenly hundreds of thousands of small businesses around the country can't afford to do that anymore, and they can't afford to pay people. It would make 2008, like, if we just had the same amount of depression, like recession, that we had in 2008, then we'd be getting off light. Right? Because, I mean, it would be, I think, a fucking full-blown depression. You know? Like, seriously, like, this would be bad shit. Here we go. That's what I want. Okay, that line is too thick. Right? I mean, something around, estimated 8 million jobs would be at risk of basically overnight disappearing. 8 million jobs, right? I mean, can you imagine that sort of devastation? 8 million people out of work overnight, no places hiring, right? And then this time, you wouldn't be able to get big, bailouts from the government because the fucking government would be shut down. That happened in 2008. People got bailouts. That happened in 2020 because of COVID. The government provided bailouts, things like that. Well, now you wouldn't have that because the government's shut down because politicians are fighting over the debt ceiling because they won't pay the fucking debt. So that means the government can't incur any more debt until they get up off their asses and fucking pass raise the fucking debt ceiling, right? So that's like incredibly bad. I mean, that would be the best case scenario. That would be the good scenario. If they default on that debt, is that it would be 2008. If we were lucky, right? It could be way worse than that. So, this is, when they say that this is a hostage crisis, like, it's not a joke. It really is taking the economy hostage, And the Republicans just do this as a matter of course. Nobody bats an eye. And then you look at the news media and all that, and it's fight over the debt ceiling. It's like, why don't you fucking tell it what it actually is? What it actually is that the conservatives and the GOP and the Republicans are playing games with your livelihood. With your livelihood. Do you have a job? Then you are at risk of losing that job if they fuck up the debt ceiling. And it doesn't matter what industry you're in. It doesn't matter what you do. right? Doesn't matter if you own your business. Doesn't matter. No, everybody's at risk when these fuckers play games like this. So that's why this shit is so important. I like how it's just become a matter of course. It's just every time we have a Democratic president, debt ceiling fight, they end up shutting the government down. They shut it down under Clinton. They shut it down under Obama. They shut it down once under Trump, but that was a completely different story because Trump was a fucking idiot and he took credit for it, suffered for it. Politically he suffered for it. So here's the thing, right? They say, okay, I've been hearing a lot from people saying, how come Biden just doesn't enforce the 14th Amendment? The people have actually been saying is, how come he doesn't invoke the 14th Amendment? Well, you don't invoke the Constitution, right? Like it's some kind of magic spell or some shit. You enforce the Constitution because the Constitution is the law. You don't have to invoke it. How come he just doesn't enforce it? How come he just doesn't go to Kevin McCarthy and say to him, screw you, 14th Amendment says you have to pay it, so fucking pay it. Basically, long story short, is that would also cause chaos in the markets. Now, it wouldn't cause a full-blown recession or anything like that. But what would happen is that, of course, it'd have to go before the Supreme Court. So it would be litigated, right? Now, you would say, okay, well, in the meantime, Congress would be forced to actually pay the bill, right? Maybe, maybe not. We don't know. It would have to go before a judge, and a judge would have to make that decision. And most likely, if the judge wasn't crazy, they'd make a decision, but you never know, right? But here's the other thing. As it's being litigated, it would also cause chaos in the markets. And it could potentially also not only just scare off investors, because who's going to invest in government bonds, right? Who's going to buy our debt when there's a legal fight over whether or not the United States has to actually pay its debt? Who's going to invest in that, right? Not anybody who's smart, right? No, they're going to wait until the fight's over with. I mean, I wouldn't. That's kind of like investing in a company that's going out of business, wouldn't you think? Kind of sounds like it to me, right? So that's the first thing, is that it could cause the market to crash. It could cause, stock market downturn. It could cause all kinds of crazy shit. So, and then plus they'd have to, then it would eventually get before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is filled with ideologues. We don't know how they're going to vote. I mean, you would say, well, logically, it only makes sense for them to actually vote this way or that way. The Constitution is not muddy on this point. I mean, it doesn't say maybe, right? It says, debt shall not be questioned, right? But you never know with this Supreme Court. I mean, they already turned over Roe v. Wade and went against 50 years of precedent and established law in order to enforce their fucking political agenda. So who's to say they won't do the same thing here? We don't know. So that could be risky as well. Now, there's a good chance that they would win that fight, but I could totally understand them not wanting to take that route. The other alternative I've seen is the good old $1 trillion coin trick. Now, you may have seen people talking about this, pundits and stuff talking about this, and what that comes from is that the law says that the Treasury Department can mint coins, right? So we've kind of originally it was up to Congress in order to print money, and then they created the Treasury Department, and now our money is sort of just created out of thin air. Now it's created by the Federal Reserve, and it's not like the majority of money isn't actually printed in bills. It's just numbers on a computer screen nowadays. Money literally is just made out of thin air. And because what does a central bank do? They basically give money to regional banks, and then regional banks distribute those, to other banks. And then when you go to get a loan or something, that's where the money the bank gets comes from. In so many words, there's a lot more to it than that, but that's a simplified version of it, right? That's what quantitative easing is and all that stuff. Basically just money coming down from the Fed going to your bank so that they can loan it out. essentially, right, what the $1 trillion coin trick is that, well, the mint, the Treasury Department would just create a coin out of platinum and say $1 trillion, and then they would just take that and pay off $1 trillion of the national debt with it, and then that would be, now we have $1 trillion before we hit the debt ceiling. Now, there's no legal reason why that shouldn't work. I mean, I was kind of looking it up, and I can't see any reason why that wouldn't work. Like, why don't they do it? Right. The only thing that I can think of is that, well, maybe that might cause instability in the markets. Maybe, maybe the stock market might interpret that as a debt ceiling default. Technically it isn't. People say that, one thing I've seen is that they go, well, this will result in a lot of inflation, blah, blah, blah. Not really. Not really, because if they were to do that, then it becomes an asset of the central, the Fed, the Federal Reserve, the central bank. Here's the thing, right? It would basically be the exact same thing as quantitative easing. Well, and they go, okay, well, that's fine, but how come it doesn't result in inflation? Because quantitative easing does not result in inflation. See, we've been doing quantitative easing off and on since 2008 many, many times. Somewhere in the area of $4 to $7 trillion in quantitative easing over the last decade. That's basically 4 to 7 trillion. We don't really know how much. There's no precise number as to how much actually has been pumped into the economy through quantitative easing. At least not that I could find. If somebody out there can find the exact number, I don't know. It's somewhere something between $4 to $7 trillion, right? Well, how come we haven't seen lots of inflation while that was happening? Because inflation only happens when poor people get money. That's how you get inflation, right? Inflation only occurs when normal, ordinary people like you and me suddenly have spending power. Then suddenly all the companies and corporations out there and stuff realize, hey, I can get more of that money, and prices start going up. That's why inflation is high now. Why is inflation high now? Because we're at the lowest unemployment ever. I mean, yeah, there's other reasons too. There's lots of supply chain reasons because of COVID and stuff like that, blah, 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 blah. And that is actually still going on, believe it or not. They still haven't completely resolved the supply chain reasons because it takes a long time for, it's going to take several years at least for us to get back to normal when it comes to that kind of thing. So there's still lots of things like supply chains and business, connections that took decades to form, which were severed, stuff like that. A lot of places went out of business, and now somebody else has to pop up in order to take their place and whatever service they provided, etc., etc. I mean, they've done a good job of getting rid of some of the backup, but it's still going to be a long time before the supply chain issues are resolved. But really, the real reason why inflation is high is because people have money, because wages went up, because coming back from COVID, lots of people said, I'm not going back to my old shitty job because fuck that place. And people went out and got better jobs. And they figured, because what happened? What happened during COVID is that, all the corporations and companies and stuff basically just threw everybody under the bus. Said, okay, well, you're all laid off. We don't need you. Sorry. And then, they shut down. And lots of people had to survive without their income that they had. And however they did it, they moved in with family, something like that. They took lesser paying jobs, whatever. I had that same problem myself, I had to scramble to find a job during the fucking height of COVID. It was not a good time, right? And now, so people are making do with less, and now that they're going back to work over all of 2022 and 2023, after we all got vaccines and stuff, and now it's okay, come back to work, and people are saying, no, I'm not going back unless I get more, unless it's worth my time. People want to get paid. So what happened? Wages actually went up for the first time in ever. Wages went up. What happens when you have full employment with higher wages? coupled with supply chain issues and other things like that, inflation. So that's why. So when the money goes to the rich people, like it has been this whole time, when they just do quantitative easing and just give the money to the banks and the corporations, inflation doesn't go up. Why? Because it's already there, because they already have it. The rich people already have the money. It's only when it's only when the middle class and poor people actually get spending power, suddenly inflation increases. So taking the $1 trillion coin over to the Federal Reserve and then dropping it off is not going to result in any inflation. Not really. It could result, though, in an unstable market. So here's the thing, right? When you have something like, when you have markets, it doesn't matter so much that the markets are like high or low. It doesn't matter so much. That's not what they're actually looking for. They don't care how high the stock market is or whatever, right? Or how high stock prices are or how much trading, whatever, right? They don't give a shit about that. What they care about is stability in the markets, right? Because instability is what scares away investors. So if you think that the stock market is going to crash next week, then you're less likely to invest your money than if you think that it's just a bear market. And okay, well, it's just a bear market, but if I just hang in there and not pull my money out, everything will be cool. That's the difference, right? From what I can tell, the only reason why they don't want to do the $1 trillion coin thing is that they think that the markets might interpret that as a signal that there's going to be a default, right? Like the markets might go, okay, well, this is the last resort. They're doing this last resort thing because they're not going to pay it, and then that might spook investors, and then the stock market might crash or some shit. That's really the only thing that I can see why they wouldn't fucking do it, right? And to be honest, it's like I mean, I don't see what the problem is, but I'm not an economist, so please remember I'm just a layman here. I could be completely wrong about all this shit. I could be talking out of my ass, so don't just take my word for it. But it is worth studying up on this stuff just so you can kind of see what's happening and how bad you're getting screwed by the conservatives and Republicans when they decide to play chicken with the fucking debt ceiling, right? So this is why this shit's important, because they use it basically to get concessions on stuff that that they know are not popular, right? The ACA, for example, is extremely popular, and it was extremely popular back then. Back in 2013. That was even before it. 2013 was even before it was fully implemented, but it was extremely popular then. That's when the healthcare companies stopped doing things like kicking poor people off of the rolls. Used to be like, for example, if you'd have health insurance, and then if you actually got sick, your health insurance would just refuse to pay. They'd find some excuse and they would just not pay you, and then you would have to sue them in order to get them to pay, in order to actually uphold their part of the contract. And a lot of the times they would fight it because it was cheaper for them to fight the lawsuit than it was to actually pay out, right? Well, part of the ACA was to put an end to that. And it's extremely popular, right? Well, Republicans hate that. Why? Because their friends in the insurance industry don't make any money. If they have to actually pay out, they don't make any money. So they can't pass a law to take that away because it's hugely popular. And they know if they actually passed a law to remove healthcare from millions of people, then they would suffer politically for it. It would be a bridge too far even for Republicans. Even for all the Republicans who are sitting there going, oh, we hate the ACA, it's a spawn of Satan, whatever. If you took that away from them, people in the red states would suffer the most, and there would be backlash, right? So what do? Instead, they use the debt ceiling as a way to try to strong-arm Democrats into doing their dirty work for them. And that's what they've been doing for the last 20 years. Since fucking Clinton is how this, since when Clinton was president is when this shit started, is when they started using this tactic, right? They can't pass crap themselves because the shit that they want to pass is extremely unpopular. So they use spending and fighting over the debt ceiling and deficit spending and shit like that in order to force Democrats to enact their agenda. Same thing happened with Obama again in 2011, right? When they made the Bush tax cuts permanent. You know, tax cuts for rich people is not a popular thing. It's like, do you give a fuck if like, you know, Jeff Bezos gets another 5% off his taxes? Fuck no. Fuck Jeff Bezos. Nobody cares. And if you poll most people in the United States, most of them say tax the fucking rich. That's what most people say, right? So Republicans know that it's extremely unpopular to give away millions and millions of dollars to super rich people when everybody else is fucking struggling. So what do? They use debt ceiling, you know, the debt ceiling tactics and fighting over deficit spendings and budgets and things like that in order to force Democrats to do their dirty work for them. That's the pattern. And then whenever a Republican becomes president, no fight over the debt ceiling, right? Passed it 7 times under Bush Jr. Absolutely no fight whatsoever. Passed it, you know, multiple times under Trump. I don't have in front of me how many, but that, you know, the debt ceiling went up under Trump as well. Zero fight, right? Zero fight from the Republicans, the fiscally conservative Republicans. Zero fight from the Democrats. Maybe the Democrats should fucking do it. Maybe they should fight over the debt ceiling. Maybe they should do the exact same fucking tactics against the Republicans. But who knows? Republicans might go for it, right? They might be like, okay, well, we're just going to cut all spending to everything that isn't military. I mean, I don't know. That shit could backfire, so maybe they shouldn't do that. It's a goddamn joke. The debt ceiling is a fucking joke. So whenever you hear it, you know, stupid fucking debt ceiling, just whenever you see that in the news, just remember it's just the Republican Party, specifically the Republican Party, jamming a huge spiky dildo right up your a-hole there and butt fucking the American public once again in order to get shit that they know that people don't like. That's what the debt ceiling is all about. Our country is a disgrace, folks. Hello, folks. If you like what I do and you want to support the channel, please consider buying something from my Etsy shop, supporting me on Patreon, liking and subscribing, and checking me out across my social media links listed below. Thank you all so much, and see you next time.